a training injury is one of those high probability, ultimately low impact risks. I think absolutely our focus is on the really low probability, huge impact risks. Those are the things we need to worry about.
My name's Sean McGovern. I'm the CEO of AXA XL in the UK. And it's a great pleasure for me to be here at Anfield today with Andy Hughes, who's the Managing Director of Liverpool Football Club. And obviously Liverpool Football Club is one of the most iconic football clubs in the world, igniting passion for its fans. And Andy is managing director of the club, has played a pivotal role in really driving the strategic direction of the club, really helping foster that passion and enthusiasm, but also focusing on driving operational excellence across the whole of what the club does and what the club stands for. So Andy, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you very much. Thanks for the intro.
So, Andy, you stepped into the managing director role in 2020 after 7 years on the board. Yeah. I guess it would just be good to understand a little bit more about, how you brought your experience from other parts of your career, so hospitality, for example, how you brought that experience and how it informed you taking on the roles you've had at Liverpool and ultimately, your role as managing director.
Yeah, so I actually started my career trained as an accountant with Ernst & Young, and that is kind of really important in that it gives you a great grounding in the sort of technical aspects of risk, but also you get to see lots of different firms, how they're doing it. You get to see good, you get to see bad. So it's really great to have that perspective. But I've also worked for big multinational companies that, I think would claim to be best in class, but I've also worked for smaller businesses under a lot of pressure where risk is just so far down the line, other priorities, etc. But I also feel I was lucky in a sense, experience-wise, to have been through the odd crisis here or there. And I think the first time I was actually part of a crisis group and I was truly awful. I literally contributed nothing. I couldn't focus on the issue at hand. I was focused on the crisis itself, but a massively important learning experience. It was a long time ago, but then also things like just working through the financial crisis at a major company, sort of 2008, 2009, and just getting a sort of understanding of just how deep that could go. And obviously in a finance world, just what that meant, where you thought you got covered to this point, but financing agreements being pulled away from you that you thought were in place, etc. So I just, that really gave me a sense of what a crisis could really look like. And I think all those things were incredibly helpful. But football is very different. And I think what was really important when I started was to listen, to understand where we were as a club, what we were dealing with. But I think the clear thing for me that we had to get right was to think slightly more longer term about where we were going. Football can be a really short-term business. It's sort of one transfer window to the next, one game to the next, but ultimately you're not going to make long-term progress unless you sort of lift your head up and look forward. So we have a pretty comprehensive longer-term strategic planning process. I think we've done enormous work on governance, structure, but we're lucky. We've got an incredibly engaged ownership group and incredibly successful, smart, who've inputted in lots of key decisions throughout that period and have played an active part in the process as we've moved forward. And you need all those components to make progress. And I think we've done that pretty successfully over the last few years.
You're the stewards of iconic community organisation that's obviously now that community is global community. So I guess that heightens a degree of pressure.
Yeah, no, it definitely weighs heavy. It's obviously hugely important. I'm a fan myself. It means so much to me. But we have stakeholders everywhere. So, I mean, let me give you an example. As we building the stadium, there's a housing behind the stadium. We're in a residential area. The residential community in and around Anfield, some of them aren't Liverpool supporters, and obviously the implications on a match day for them, if you live around the corner, are really significant. So doing things like going to meetings with ward councillors, understanding what their viewpoints are, trying to make some changes to how match day runs and how we can help, and working with the council, working on transport, all those things. You have to take all of those things on board. And I can see progress everywhere. I can also see extra things we still need to work on.
When you look at a football club, it's a hugely complex ecosystem. You've got a huge amount of things that you have to be dealing with that the fans don't see, that aren't about players being on the pitch performing. You've got, health and safety issues. You've got cybersecurity issues. You're transporting players all over the world at any one time. So how do you take the experience that you just spoke about and think about how you manage that holistic risk that you see across everything that the club does?
Yeah, well, we've definitely been on a journey in my time at the club, and not coming from the world of football, it was a bit of a shock, I think, when I first started, just sort of getting my head around the different areas of risk that we were dealing with. And it was a very different time. The club was under an enormous amount of pressure. It was under financial pressure, performance pressure. It had been under financial pressure for a long period of time. So, things like keeping up with maintenance and things like that are just very difficult. But also when you're under that level of pressure, you're not going to have, a really structured strategy process, long-term thinking, risk management processes, etc. So risk was done at a very sort of individual level, departmental level, manager level, probably without people really thinking through that that's what they were accountable for, that's what they were dealing with. And we didn't have this overarching process, which obviously is enormously risky because that leads you to potentially missing some things or just simply not having the oversight. So, and we are a complex organization with many, many different risks. That sort of overarching process is critically important. So that was the thing that we've set about putting in place. We have a team of people running that, lots of different departments are involved, and I feel as though it's really well embedded across the club. There's a very clear risk register. There's a lot of work that's taken place over the years. There's things we've identified we should have looked at and haven't looked at. And we've changed our approach to risk management in a number of areas once we sort of had the visibility of it. But when you sort of see it in aggregate, it is quite surprising, the scope and scale, and the skill, I think, and the answer that nobody can get perfectly right is, what does that balance look like? How far do you go? What do you address at the cost of what? So those are the questions that I think we wrestle with today, but the governance and the process is really strong.
Can I just sort of dig into that a little bit more, Andy? You've got the processes in place, the governance is there. Now, obviously, we know about the use of data and analytics on the field. I'm sure data and analytics has its role in how you look at the management of the risks off the field. How do you balance, driving decision-making off data, off the analysis of data, versus what you need to do, which is about your judgment and about the instincts that you have about, ultimately, that drive the decision-making?
Yeah. I always feel you need a bit of both, and it really depends what the issue is and what data can bring to that particular issue. I mean, there's certainly some risks we look at where, I guess incidents around a match day, there's not really any data you're going to be looking at to manage the risk around that. But there's other areas where they just lend themselves to data. So I think one of the first things I looked at when I arrived, in fact, it was a question somebody else had raised, but it's very common in football to insure the squad against injuries. And we have phenomenal data scientists working in our football world. And they were very quickly able to, once they understood the questions that we were trying to understand, they could give me fantastic analysis, which, it's, a training injury is one of those high probability, ultimately low impact risks. And, I think absolutely our focus is on the really low probability, huge impact risks. Those are the things we need to worry about. So very quickly led to a decision that actually just didn't make any sense to be spending that money insuring risks that, the squad should be ready for. And, even if that insurance did pay out for that specific injury, of course, it's complicated around medical conditions, etc. You can't do anything about it until the transfer window. And at that point, is it actually a material issue? So we basically started to insure loads of things we weren't insuring and stopped insuring loads of things that we had been insuring as a result of, some very, very quick data analysis. So it's definitely got its place.
Yeah. So we talked about some of the unique aspects of, running a club. Everything that you do is visible. You've got the shareholders who have their expectations, but you have a very passionate fan base all over the world. You're carrying their hopes and aspirations and dreams for what the team can do. I mean, again, reflecting on a bit maybe on your past, but now what you've been doing with your time at the club is that visibility of the sort of decisions that you're taking and the risks that you're absorbing. I mean, that visibility, how does that sort of change the way that you have to think about risks given the club's reputation and standing?
Our fans are unbelievably passionate. We have an enormous fan base around the world. And the thing I think is really important from this is that we actually listen. It's an easy thing to say, but I think it's really important that we ask questions, we ask for input, and we do have a supporters board, which I think has sort of helped that process. And I think just getting a better understanding of their perspective, often in advance of, say a risky game or something, is something that we've been doing for quite a long time. And I definitely think it helps. I'm sure if you were to ask them, they may go, well, you didn't really listen. But in truth, you're always trying to balance so many different viewpoints. But I can cite many examples where we've had invaluable feedback from them in advance of a game that's actually helped how we've managed a specific game and a specific risk. So it's become an important part of the process. But also, on some level, I actually think it's quite helpful that, it's not necessarily in a football club. I mean, in any business, we're not an enormous business, we're medium size, but the reality of it is we're facing the sort of risk profile I think you would see in a major global multinational. So it's actually quite difficult to resource that, get your head around it, etc. But I think everybody knows we're so visible, it really keeps everybody focused. And, it helps us. I think we often ask the question, we'll play out the scenario, how will this play out? How would this look to the fans, etc., etc. So I try and see it as an asset. And I think, very quickly you forget you're actually doing your job. You're assessing all the risks and, everybody's just getting on with it. So
that's interesting. So you see the visibility, the sort of brand impact actually means that people probably are sharper as a consequence, because I guess the impact can be so quick because you're so visible.
And I think a lot of our staff have personally experienced that. You know, we've been through moments, and those moments can be really challenging to deal with. And, you know, one thing we have to look out for is sort of mental health support. You know, if you're in the middle of a crisis, often the people working on it are struggling with the situation, because there's just so, you know, you go home and you're on the news, you know, you can't turn off from it. So there are consequences to it, definitely.
Well, maybe explore a little bit more on that, Andy, if you like, the human side of risk, because you've touched on it there, which is very real in a club when it's dealing with a crisis or a tragedy. I mean, just if you could say a little bit more about how you manage that sort of human side of risk, because you can put the governance and the processes, but it's the impact on people who working for the club, but also, you know, stakeholders like obviously the fans. I mean, how do you think about that human side of risk?
Well, I think it's incredibly important, and I guess we've experienced that in the moment. I mean, there's a few things in there. I feel it's actually hard to predict when, you know, these fast-paced, or maybe not crises, incidents, you know, when they're actually happening and it's at pace. It's hard to predict in advance how the team are going to respond to that and react to that. And, you know, I sort of mentioned my own personal experience. The first time I was in that situation, you know, I was hopeless, but obviously you learn from that, you reflect on it. But also I've witnessed people you would assume would be just really good at this, and actually are not necessarily, you know, maybe it can be training, it can be other emotional issues, and some people are just naturally very good. But I think we've dealt with enough issues. We now know who we need on the team, what types of personalities. Those people have got a lot of experience. We have quite a number of ex-police in our team as well, our safety officer, for example. And I think as a group, we've been through those enough times that actually my job in those situations is to make sure the process is working, the right decisions are being considered, and under enormous pressure, I feel really confident. Actually, we're very good at that. But then what I witness is it's afterwards. It's you can see that it's always taken a toll, and it's not just the people directly involved, of course. It's our fans, it's other people outside the incident. So when we've been in those situations, we've really tried to take a step back and say, okay, what's the right thing to do here? And we've offered mental health support to our fans in certain situations. We've tried to talk directly to our fan groups and work with them and sort of ask them their input on what can we do to help, what do we do next. And I think that's really important, you know, when something's gone wrong, to think about those things and be on top of it. But it is a big issue, there's no question.
I guess a lot of what you've just spoken about speaks to the culture of the club and the Liverpool way. I mean, can you say any more about how that sort of translates into the sort of management of risk, how you carry that culture into the management of risk?
Yeah, no, it is interesting. I think naturally the club sort of has a culture, you know, a lot of the staff, most of the staff are fans. They sort of kind of get the Liverpool way, but we've also done a lot of work on our culture, our values, our principles. And we try always in those situations to be asking those questions and, you know, not just how will it play out, but what is the right thing to do in this situation for different stakeholders, different groups. And it's a difficult thing to do in the moment, but I've witnessed us do it many, many times. I've also witnessed us make some mistakes in the past. But I think, you know, we were really strong in those moments afterwards to reflect on that and go, did we do the right thing here? Do we need to go back and revisit? And do we need to rethink this decision and ultimately try to sort of swallow the mistake, take it on the chin and go, let's do the right thing and move forward. And I think that really does speak to the strength of the culture and values of the club.
So is it part of the culture then, whether it's risk or otherwise, to look at kind of lessons learned? So, reflect, as you said, reflecting on an incident or an issue and trying to learn the lessons. Is that sort of fairly well embedded in the way the club operates, would you say?
Yeah, it's a lot better than it used to be. I mean, it's sometimes a really hard thing to do. You're moving at fast paced, what do you go back and look at? You can't go back and look at everything. Everybody's really busy. But we have, in certain instances, really, when we've decided to do it, we've done it in incredible detail. We've got, individual statements from people separately, really got back and looked at it and tried to learn from it. We've actually tried to take that into externally facilitated training, which has been incredibly valuable. And, maybe we've only picked up on small things, but I think it's really important. But also, I think when there's a sense that something significant has gone wrong, I think there's a natural inclination. Everybody's going, what did we do wrong? What did I do wrong? Etc. You obviously, you've got to park that in the moment. But it is important in those situations to look at it properly, not with a lens of blame, but a lens of, we've got to sort this out and do better next time. And I think generally when we've done that, we've never really come up with a lot of things that we did all this wrong, but we've come up with little things that actually the process would have worked better in this situation. Actually, if you were in a different location at this, we wouldn't have had to worry about comms issues, for example. Yeah. So we've picked up on lots of stuff that I think has definitely improved how we behave in the moment.
And maybe just sort of some personal reflections from you, Andy. You said at the beginning that when you first were faced with some issues and risk and crisis situations, you didn't feel like you necessarily had something to contribute. That's obviously evolved as you've moved through and into leadership roles. You've talked about lessons learned, in terms of the management of issues at the club. I mean, what lessons have you learned, if you like, that have taken you from where you were, which is, as you described it, someone who couldn't really feel like you added, to somebody who can now oversee a sort of management of risk across a whole of a club? I mean, what's the sort of standout lessons that you would have learned from all of that?
I think some of the key things are actually just fact checking. So the one thing I've sort of noticed in the moment is very much a rush to judgment. There can be a sort of comment around X, but do we know it really was X? Actually, what did that really look like? So that I'm not, in a fast-paced moment, you can't take forever. But just being absolutely sure that the information you're hearing is right, and just checking that with the group. Do we know this? Is this an assumption? So that is something that stood out a few times for me that, is really, really important to get right in the moment. But I think also for me, I sort of learn that lesson of focused on what you're dealing with. What are the decisions you've got to take step by step, stay calm, all those things. But also for me, I'm very conscious that I need to be aware of how the team are operating, how's the process working, who needs to be doing what, where, and often the decisions that are required, they're not necessarily my decisions, they're a collective decision, or somebody else needs to be taking it. But I sort of often see my role as just being the sort of guardian to make sure the governance is working well. And I think we've seen that a few times, and I definitely think I've learned from that over the years.
So having confidence in the people, the process. So Andy, if you could just, obviously we've talked about the scrutiny of everything that Liverpool Football Club does. We've talked about the fast pace of the world, but also obviously the club. Everything moves at pace. How do you kind kind of switch? What do you do to try to switch off and get away? I'm sure it's quite hard sometimes to get away because it's, you're in a business that, with fans all over the world, it's a sort of 24-hour business in a respect. So just how do you try to take some time out and
well, I'm going to give you a bit of a rubbish answer. But,
watch some football?
Yeah. But you are right. It's very, very difficult. And I feel for a long period of time in my role, it really has been 24/7. You've got a sort of normal office job in the week. You potentially got matches in the week. You've got matches at the weekend. There's people traveling everywhere. I sort of thought from the outside in my role, I might actually not be that busy in the summer, but that was completely ridiculous. Obviously, you've got a transfer window. We're holding major events. If we're doing any sort of building, construction work, it'll be a really intense period across the summer. So there are very, very few gaps in the schedule where you can actually switch off. And, for a long period of time, for me, match day was just the most intense thing because, one, I'm a fan, of course, and it's emotional enough just coming to watch a game of football. But you're also hosting people. You've got a lot of guests, clients. There's a lot of operational stuff going on. But then also, it's sort of in the back of my mind, if something happens, I'm on point here, and I've got to be ready. And just you put those sort of three things together, and it's just the most stressful thing. I'm in a very different place now because we just have such a great team of people. I actually feel I can just relax a little bit now and just worry about the football, which, can be very worrying. Yeah, and so it's very hard during a sort of busy period to switch off at all, which I know is not overly healthy, but the one sort of gap we do get in the schedule for us, I think, is international breaks, because the team will go off. They'll be dealing, with their national teams, etc., and everybody just takes a moment. And that's not, for a lot of people at the club, that is their little golden gap.
Now you're stepping away from the club at the end of the season. Can I ask you to sort of project forward a little bit as to how you think the sort of world of risk is going to change for Liverpool Football Club, for all football clubs, in a world that's ever changing? How do you think about that future risk landscape for a football club?
Yeah, well, it's changed dramatically for us, I think, over the last 10 years, both in terms of the risks we face, the skills and expertise of our team, the governance we have in place. And I think we're in a really good shape structurally, governance-wise, to deal with whatever comes up. But I do see the threats increasing as time goes on. I mean, a good example would be cyber threat, which I think for most businesses has been increasing dramatically. I think when I first joined, there was the odd attack, and we were trying to train staff, and we're under attack many times every hour now. I mean, and I only see that getting more and more challenging. But also the reputation level of Liverpool Football Club. The Premier League has got much bigger. It's gained a bigger global audience, and that brings with it its own risks and challenges. And I think as the world gets more uncertain, which seems to be the trend that we're going in, those sort of political risks and the potential for a malicious actor to use the club for their own gain just gets greater and greater and needs more and more focus. So challenging landscape ahead for someone else.
But it will be important because obviously Liverpool will, I am sure, go on to continue to grow and continue in its success, which, will increase in itself, increase the risk landscape for Liverpool. But from what we've heard from you, what are the key lessons that you've learned from your time here about how you should think about managing risk?
Yeah, I think the key thing for me is it's all about the team. It's considering all your stakeholders. It's being prepared to listen and act. It's having great process and trusting great people on your team to deliver a program and respond in a crisis.
Great. Well, it's been really fantastic to have the opportunity to talk to you and hear how you think about risk in a completely different context. It's been great. Some really great insights. Appreciate you spending the time with us today. It's been really great to meet you, Andy. Thank you for joining us.
Nice to meet you.
Thank you.
Cheers.